So off to you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Let me put my face on so you can see me. All right, so we were talking about 1 Nephi chapter 5, and today might be a little bit more discussion than we've had in the past. I don't know if there's a way for me to share my screen halfway or not. Oh well. Anyway, we are on chapter 5. All right, so starting off, this is just after Nephi had spoken to his brethren, and just off the tail end of his vision, he finds them disputing, and then they speak for a while. And then he ends up speaking, and they say, thou hast declared unto us hard things more than which we are able to bear. And he just keeps right on rolling on over them, right? Saying, I know that I had spoken hard things against the wicked according to the truth, and the righteous have I justified. Wherefore the guilty taketh the truth to be hard. Man, sometimes Nephi is intense. And I don't know. I am not near as intense as that guy, but maybe I just don't have the same surety that he does. Anyway, he says something that I think is really interesting at the bottom of this page. He says, the guilty taketh the truth to be hard, for it cutteth them very central. And now, my brethren, if ye were righteous and were willing to hearken to the truth and give heed unto it, that ye might walk uprightly before God, then you would not murmur because of the truth. That phrase, walk uprightly before God, really struck me. And it just caused me to think, how can I walk uprightly when, at least for me, my weaknesses are so apparent. They're so clear to me that walking uprightly before God seems like something I don't know if I can do. And I just wanted to throw it out there to those who are listening. If you have any thoughts, does that make sense? Does my how do we get to the point where we can walk upright, standing upright before God, rather than maybe in this other form, either murmuring because of the truth, or just feeling like you can't walk uprightly before Him? Anyone have any thoughts?
Oh, I've got a thought. This is Marie. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Maybe one thing that would be helpful with walking uprightly before God is understanding His love for you and His relationship with you. And then, yeah, basically that.
I like that.
So it's a lot easier to walk uprightly. Think about people that know you well, even that know your weaknesses. You can be like present and whole with them because they know you and they know your intentions. And when you understand how much God knows you and loves you and understands your intentions, I think it's a lot easier to be present with Him and walk uprightly with Him.
I like that. I think that's true, and I think that in my best moments or my better moments where I'm understanding God, then I do feel that way. And it's only when maybe wandering, in the mists, or when I'm focused on maybe how I am, that I forget the way God is. So thanks. All right. So moving on, he exhorts his brethren with all diligence to keep the commandments of the Lord. And it came to pass that they did humble themselves before the Lord, insomuch that I had joy and great hopes of them, because that they would walk in the paths of righteousness. That struck me. It struck me that his words were so powerful. I'm sure everyone in this quote-unquote room has had discussions with people of other faiths, and especially of our past tradition, and you try to exhort them, and most of the time it doesn't seem to work out. But Nephi does, even though he spoke things that are hard to hear, and maybe it's what he said next that he didn't write down. I don't know, but he did exhort them with all diligence, and they humbled themselves before the Lord. I think that's really cool that he also had joy and great hopes for them, and that's even despite his vision. His vision in 1 Nephi 4:2 said that the things he saw must surely come to pass. And so, and yet, even though he knew that the things of the vision would surely come to pass, he still had great hopes for them because they humbled themselves. And so something else that was interesting to me is you see this pattern with Nephi and his brothers where he speaks and, they listen. Often they do, not always, of course. But it reminded me of something I was reading in the Interpreter Foundation Journal. And they're talking about Enoch and what Enoch did. And so they first quotes the book of Moses, where Enoch reads of the book of remembrance. And it says, as Enoch spake forth the words of God, the people trembled and could not stand in his presence. So we see that Enoch could speak the words of the Lord, and people would, they couldn't stand. They would fall on their knees. They would humble themselves before what they had heard. What's cool about the article, and it just came out, so if you look at the Interpreter Journal, you could find it. But in the Book of Giants, what's a reading that we found much later from the Qumran, it says that the leaders of the mighty warriors bowed down and wept in front of Enoch. And then First Nephi describes a similar reaction when Enoch finished his preaching. It says, then I, Enoch, went and spoke to all of them together, and they were all afraid and trembling, and fear seized them. And they asked that I write a memorandum of petition for them, that they might have forgiveness, and that I recite the memorandum of petition for them in the presence of the Lord of heaven. For they were no longer able to speak or to lift their eyes to heaven out of shame for the deeds through which they had sinned and for which they had been condemned. And they were sitting and weeping at Abel Main, covering their faces. I know that was kind of a lot of text, and I should have maybe pulled up that article here so you could read along with me. But this is the article. In Old Testament, know why, for Gospel Doctrine, Lesson 5. If thou dost well, thou shalt be accepted. If you look at this, you can find that quote further on. What it does is compares Joseph's Book of Moses, Enoch story, to others that have come up since Joseph passed away. Anyway, what I found interesting here with Nephi is part of my question this whole time is, why is Nephi sharing what he's sharing? Why talk about what he did? And at least here, it seems like Nephi is showing the fruits of a teacher, someone that can speak and cause people to humble themselves, which I did not fully grasp how powerful that was until I'd had that in my own life with, this guy that we claim is a teacher, who almost everything he puts out causes me to humble myself, to really think back and think down deep and find something there that I hadn't seen before. Anyway, I guess I didn't think about the power of words, and I think Nephi here, at least one of the things he's doing is showing us that he had this power, he had this gift. So he says, so going on, and this is today is just kind of a running commentary. So if you have thoughts, feel free to jump in. I wanted to point out something that was interesting to me, at least, in the second paragraph at the end. This is the paragraph where they get married, where they each take one of the daughters, only one, right? Not multiple. One of the daughters of Ishmael, the wife, and this line that I've highlighted says, and also I, Nephi, had been blessed of the Lord exceedingly. And I think if I did my little search correctly, that's the very first time that he says he'd been blessed exceedingly. In the very intro to his book, Nephi talks about how he had seen lots of afflictions in his days, but had also been highly favored of the Lord and had been blessed exceedingly. And this is kind of the first time that happens. And I just kind of get the sense, it's a tiny little mention, but I got the sense that Nephi was finally being blessed exceedingly, and for him, and that was due in part to this woman that goes unnamed in his record. But I thought that was interesting. So that's what I found in paragraph 2. If there's no one else, no other thoughts, I'll keep going. In the next paragraph, the Liahona shows up, and they use this weird, right, this round ball of curious workmanship. Curious is a phrase, or that's a word that if you look in the Old Testament, you find always refers to something in the temple. That something was done, curious workmanship, or after a curious fashion. And so I think there's something there to kind of point. I think if we were really familiar with the Old Testament, that would point us to the temple, point us to say this is something not necessarily temple, but maybe heaven related. Also, it's interesting that it was there when his father arose in the morning. If you remember the discovery of manna, that's exactly how manna was discovered. It said that the Israelites left their tents one morning, and they stepped outside their tent door, and there was this round white ball of curious workmanship. It was not workmanship, but manna or manha means what is it? So it's this thing that they don't know what it is. So David says that BMC also points out that the brass here corresponds to the brass in the plates. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that the brass, the fine brass, is kind of a parallel. Like this is divine communication from the Lord, where if you will, the heed and diligence that you give to it will suggest what kind of how led you are on the way out.
Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, as I was reading this earlier this week, it also highlighted to me that the Liahona was separate from Lehi, meaning that the oracle wasn't a person. We're, coming from a tradition that highly regards an individual or a quorum of individuals as the living word. That isn't represented in the Liahona. The Liahona was given, and then there was messages delivered to an individual or a group of individuals, and then that became instruction from the Lord. But it wasn't a person.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I agree. Yeah, so clearly there's a lot of, even as just one little line, right? There's a lot of parallels and truths, like this idea of an oracle being, it's not his father or Nephi, it's something outside of them. Anyway, I feel like when I'm reading First Nephi that there's so much that goes, for me, I just like gloss over, and I know there's depth there. And that was the hope of what today's studies could maybe point out as some of the things we've stumbled upon. Another thing that I noticed here was within the ball were 2 spindles, and the one pointed the way whither we should go into the wilderness. To me, this feels like the doctrine of the 2 ways, which is something that Nephi kind of points back to consistently, that there are only 2 ways, or there are only 2 churches, and the one points you the way you should go through this wilderness of this life. I'm not sure what the other one does, but I don't know if we ever know. Maybe that's the one that has writing on it, or maybe the writing is somewhere else. It doesn't really say what the other spindle is, other than that the one points the way to go. Which, the law of Moses, there's a lot of the doctrine of 2 ways. You could only eat something that had a cleft foot, right? Hooves, so that, if you're picturing the hoof, right, there's this cleft in the middle, one points the wrong way, one points the right, it points straight. You see that sort of thing a lot in the Law of Moses. All right, so we next go to paragraph 4, where they carry all manner of seeds, or seed of every kind, and that, I mean, I don't know, I'm not like a super deep thinker, but it was interesting to me that the seed of every kind could also, point back to the people, right? All kinds of people were coming with Lehi, Nephi, and their group, right? It seems like if you're thinking about the world too, this world is populated with all kinds of seeds, both literal, right? I'm looking at all these trees in my yard, or metaphysical or metaphorical in us, right? We are all different types of seeds that God planted in this earth, and there's something in the fact that all living things need each other in order to grow, in order to survive. I've got a budding fruit orchard. Doesn't have any fruit yet, but lots of trees. And it's been cool to learn that you can companion plant. So you plant different types of trees next to each other, and they kind of protect each other in cool ways. For instance, there's this guami. It's a type of berry. It's like a bush berry, and if you plant it at the base of peach trees draw out a lot of nitrogen out of the soil, so you need to fertilize them a lot. But if you fertilize them too much, they get fungus and they get sick. What's cool about the guami is that it pulls nitrogen from the air and it sticks it back into the ground. It kind of pulls it out and deposits it. And so if you plant the two of those together, the peach tree provides some shade and some support for the guami bush, and the guami in turn provides nutrients out of the air and puts them back into the soil in the form of dead leaves and dead berries. And so it's a way to have a lot healthier trees without having to do anything, right? I'm not having to mow that lawn because this bush is taking up a lot of space. Anyway, it's kind of a long aside, but I found a lot of cool metaphors in just thinking about seeds, and that the Lord really does use seeds of every kind to populate his vineyard and his world, so that he can see or wait and see which ones will turn out to be good. All right, that's about all I've got. I don't have anything for 5 or 6. But when you jump to 7, we have his bow breaking. And I've read some farms articles about how they found somewhere, and I don't know, I didn't quite follow their argument about how maybe there's a place where that would cause steel to break. What I found interesting was that it was made of fine steel, just like the sword that Laban had, and he broke it. And I wondered, I was like, why are you telling us this story? Because it's an interesting story, and there's a few things that I learned, but I almost wondered if they had faith. The people ended up having faith in his bow. It's like, hey, here's the finest steel that we can produce in Jerusalem, or maybe it was even imported right from Egypt or somewhere else. And I wonder if they were starting to have faith in that thing, rather than faith in the provider of the food. And so when it breaks, then their faith is tested, right? Was your faith in the bow? Was your faith in the Lord? And we can see, going down, that everyone was exceedingly sorrowful, right? Everyone murmured against the Lord, which is pretty intense, right? Even his dad ends up murmuring against the Lord. Nephi spoke unto them again, and again they, we don't really have what the result of that, but he makes this out of wood a bow and out of a straight stick an arrow, and goes to his dad and says, "Where shall I go to obtain food?" Which, Nephi is already, to me, taken over as the leader of the group in a lot of ways. And yet he goes to his dad to ask about where to get food. And I think that was really interesting too. Interesting because his brothers are always complaining about him trying to take it upon himself to be a ruler and a teacher. But here, even though everyone had murmured against the Lord, Nephi still went to his dad, who had complained and murmured. And clearly his dad was humbled because of what the Lord said to him. Right, the voice of the Lord came unto my father, and he was truly chastened because of his murmurings against the Lord, insomuch that he was brought down into the depths of sorrow. And I don't know. There's a lot of lessons here too, right? Even when you're trying to follow the Lord and trying to do good, like Nephi and like the rest, to some extent, you still run into bumps. It doesn't mean that everything will be smooth. It doesn't seem like in scriptures there's a guarantee that things will be easy when you're obedient, or that, at least in the short term. Anyway, I thought that lesson struck me pretty strong, maybe just because of what's going on personally, but it was clear to see that, to me, that yeah, you're doing right doesn't necessarily mean things are going to be easy or everything will work out really, really well. Maybe in the end it will, and I guess that's where faith comes in. But jumping back to, unless there's any other thoughts. James has a thought.
Do you mind if I jump in and ask a question?
Yeah.
So it seems like this bow incident and Nephi going to Lehi is always held up in the LDS Church as supporting hierarchy. You go to your priesthood leader. Now I look back and think, well, maybe that's not what this is trying to illustrate at all. So why do you think he went to Lehi? Is it just do you think it really was to reinforce the patriarchal order in the family, or was it to humble Lehi, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think James had a similar thought to what I was going to say. So it's interesting that even though we have the Liahona showing up, it seems like maybe it was years earlier, right, that the Liahona shows up, and it kind of points the way that they should go. And so maybe they're getting something out of it. But this is the first time in paragraph 8 where they really look at, it seems like they really notice the Liahona, right? They really look at it. It says, look upon the ball and behold the things which are written. And, there's this new writing that changes, which to give us understanding concerning the ways of the Lord. And it was written and changed from time to time according to the faith and diligence which we gave unto it. Faith and diligence, he uses those a couple times. Right? You have to have faith that the Liahona or the scriptures or the word of the Lord, in whatever form it is, but going to Doug's point and Bryce's point, it's not necessarily a person, maybe never a person. Right? You give faith and diligence to the word of the Lord that's there, and according to the level of faith and diligence you give is the direction that you'll receive from it. And I don't know, I probably speak for everyone, at least for me, I feel like in so much more now than before, I get direction from the Book of Mormon, in part because I've come and grown into an understanding of how powerful it can be, even though I still feel like, I'm barely using it to give me direction on which way to go. I'm not really reading what's in there as it would have us read. Let's see, Dave says something deep, like always. Okay, one thing I think about is interesting about the parallelism between the brass plates and Liahona is it seems to extend to Nephi's doctrine teaching later. Yes, right. His brother asked, what is to be done after baptism? And Nephi's like, hey, you've got the word and the spirit. That's all you need to keep going. Almost like the point was supposed to be there's a graduation ceremony from organized religion. Yeah, it seems like you shouldn't need someone else to tell you what to do. Once you've started on the path, Nephi says, is there anything else to do? And no, not really. Kind of like with Liahona. Once you give faith and diligence to it, it will point the way. And even though it's the wilderness and you can't see very far ahead of you, it will point the way that you should go. Yeah, I think that's cool. All right, so again, people that humble themselves before the Lord and to give thanks unto him. Yeah, it seems like life would sure be easier if we could always do that all the time. But I guess it's hard. All right, paragraph 10. Let's see. Again, we have Laman and Lemuel getting angry and saying some things. Laman says here some interesting things, right? And after he has led us away, he has thought to make himself a king and a ruler over us, that he may do with us according to his will and pleasure. And I couldn't help thinking, it seemed so obvious. This was a judgment that they were casting upon Nephi. And like all casting, right? When you cast judgment upon someone, what you're really doing is exposing your heart, right? You're manifesting what the desires are within your heart. Right? As soon as we judge someone else, as soon as we step away from the tree of life and step towards the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? Because again, what do they say? Behold, we know that he lies unto us and tells us these things and worketh many things by his cunning arts that he may deceive our eyes. Right? They're claiming knowledge. They're claiming to know things. So they've stepped away from the tree of life. They're claiming the tree of knowledge, and they're casting judgment or pointing the finger of scorn, or these other different judgments that they're casting on him. And really what they're doing is just exposing their hearts to others around them that are open to seeing and to heaven, right? Heaven now knows that this is what they would do if they were in Nephi's position. Whereas Nephi, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But I had a thought before you moved on. It seems to me that, I don't know the best word to use, but those who kind of miss it, like Laman and Lemuel, is they're always looking at the physical world. Christ came and his kingdom was not of this world. An angel had already promised Nephi that he was going to be a king and a ruler over Laman and Lemuel. But if you look at Nephi's life, he actually is never a king or a ruler over Laman and Lemuel. He has to leave because Laman and Lemuel are going to kill him, and his kingdom, the Nephites, never subject the Lamanites during Nephi's time. Nephi is in a position of being a king and a ruler over Laman and Lemuel because of being not of this world, the same way that Christ was not of this world. He received blessings that allowed him to do that. It goes back to Joseph Smith's commentary on Melchizedek. Melchizedek, Mel meaning king, Zadok meaning priest, is a new name for Melchizedek. And he wasn't the king in Joseph Smith's commentary. In the words of Joseph Smith, Joseph Smith identifies that Melchizedek actually wasn't a king over a people or a land. He was the better translation is the king of Shalom instead of the king of Salem, which Shalom meaning peace and righteousness. So Melchizedek even was the king of peace. Denver has a great follow this line of thought. Denver has a great 30 or 40 page essay about Brigham Young's celestial kingdom, because when Brigham Young came to the Salt Lake Valley, he wanted to set up the kingdom of God like Joseph Smith was doing in Nauvoo, but Joseph was was not doing something that was physical, or at least that's what this paper talks about, something physical, but something spiritual. So, you know, I think it's a you can identify where people's hearts are, talking about the tree of life and then tree of knowledge of good and evil. If they're thinking about things that are tangible, physical, domineering, controlling the flesh, versus persuasion, long suffering, and gentleness, which always persuades the spirit. The difference between the Aaronic and the Melchizedek. Just a thought.
No, I think that's a good thought. It does seem like so many of us our thoughts are tied down here, right? They're not up there where they should be. And yeah. But I think that's a really good point. So Bryce, you also had you commented a thought. You know, Nephi going to his father is a parallel of Christ going to the Father and giving credit to the Father. You know, that was one of my points with this Enoch example as well. I think as we come to understand what the Holy Order is like, who, you know, what you must be to be part of this order, that you'll see it in these men, and you'll kind of see men and women, but mostly this examples we have in Scripture are men. You'll see it there, right? You'll see all these examples kind of resonate, and you can see the parallels among all of them. In that Enoch thing that I was talking about, let's see, I don't know if I can find it. There's someone comes to Enoch and asks, where did you come from? And let's see. What struck me about it was the exact words that someone asks. Oh, here it is. Right, there came a man unto him whose name was Mahijah, and says unto him, tell us plainly who thou art, and from whence thou comest. Those are almost word for word what the Pharisees say to Christ. Right. There's so many parallels, I think, once we start understanding these people in this order. And hopefully we'll understand it better. All right, so going over, let's see, so we're still in paragraph 10, and, you know, they've just cast all these judgments on him. And then it says, and it came to pass the Lord was with us, yea, even the voice of the Lord came and did speak many words unto them, and did chasten them exceedingly. I thought that was really interesting, that that this was delivered unto them by the Lord's own voice, which is another sign of the Holy Order. I'm looking at, you know, Genesis 14, the JST. This is part of it. I think I don't know, but I suspect that maybe Nephi asked the Lord to speak to them and say, hey, maybe he was like, I don't know what to say. You know, they've humbled themselves when I talked to them a couple times. You know, the paragraph before, that's what they did, right? They humbled themselves before the Lord and did give thanks. But already they're kind of entered back into that same cycle. So that's just my thoughts. We'll see. Anyway, we see a lot of affliction going through this, right? Much affliction in the wilderness. Like Marie pointed out, it's interesting that they're living organized religion, and they go to the wilderness and they suffer in the wilderness. I think we suffer in the wilderness too. You know, leaving what we thought was Zion and everything we wanted. We now know that we're not there, right? And we're kind of wandering around. At least I feel like I'm wandering around. I know that there is a city that will be built at some point, and that will be a place of safety and refuge. But we're not there yet. But I hope that we can get there. All right, one little quick thing. Again, so many similarities here to what was before. So the raw meat, it's interesting to me that it says that it was sweet. Maybe it doesn't say that here. Oh yeah, that's 16. Let's just skip down that really quick. So this is the Lord, sounds like this is what the Lord told them earlier. He says, I will make thy food become sweet, that you cook it not. And I will also be your light in the wilderness, and I will prepare the way before you. If it so be that ye shall keep my commandments. Again, manna was sweet. And so it's interesting that he makes it very explicit the Lord is providing this food for them. They're not there. And it's sweet, just like manna was very sweet. And then again, of course, you have the pillar by day, cloud by night type idea, where he is your light. He's their light in the wilderness, and he's preparing the way before them. Anyway, man, it's just clear to me that Nephi is trying to point our minds back to these other examples. And when we finally get to Ether, we'll see a lot of these same patterns emerge. So another quick little thing in 13, we did sojourn for the space of many years, yea, even 8 years in the wilderness. 8, of course, at least as I understand, is symbolic of new birth, right? 8 is symbolic of new beginnings. If you have a week of 7 days, it starts over on the 8th, right? 8 is something new. It's a brand new season. That's for me part of the reason why we're baptized at 8, or in scriptures that suggest baptism for children of 8 years old, to suggest this new beginning. And they come to this, this beautiful, almost promised land. Yeah, thoughts?
I've one thought. It is really interesting that Nephi highlights meat, raw meat, instead of saying manna. I just think of it. So during this time, Lehi and Nephi are actually becoming patriarchs. By the time they get to the promised land, they have covenants. They have a promised land. Nephi and Lehi are patriarchs. And as a people, they have a Melchizedek. We know this from Alma 13. They have Melchizedek priesthood. So you're getting this remnant, this branch of Israel out of Israel. They're leaving. They're going into the wilderness and they're eating meat. I wonder if that is not only food, but also doctrine and teachings and blessings from the Lord, that they're moving from the bread and the water, or the milk to the meat in the wilderness.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's a good point. And that's part of the difficulty, right? And it's really interesting if you think about, if you kind of take that further, that it doesn't need to be cooked, you can almost think of it as some comments are mentioning, moving from organized religion to something else. As you're leaving, organized religion is kind of like cooked meat, where you're cooking some things out of it, taking away maybe some of the things that are hard to distinguish or maybe don't look appealing, to make it this really pretty, palatable entree. But as you get away from that and separate yourself from it, you see that there are some things that appear to be contradictions, right? There are things that appear to be inconsistencies. But like Joseph said, truth is made manifest in resolving contradictions. And so he liked finding those, because those would help him see what he was supposed to see. All right, so I will jump ahead a little bit. So paragraph 17, this is where Nephi's just announced he's going to build a boat, and everyone's making fun of him. And again, this kind of gets back to Bryce's point. This is paragraph 17 in the middle, where they say, we might have enjoyed our possessions in the land of our inheritance. Again, they're all about enjoying the physical things, right? And we might have been happy. It's like, man, had we only stayed there, we might have been happy. So Nephi goes off on this diatribe about all these things that the Lord has done for other people, kind of showing them, hey, look, guys, there's a parallel in what's been done and what's happening here. And by the way, they kept hardening their hearts, and that was bad for them. And I wanted to point this last little thing. It came to pass, according to his word, he did destroy them, and according to his word, he did lead them, and according to his word, he did do all things for them. And there was not anything done save it were by his word. That to me really struck to me because I had this image of I'm a man, so I think of a man, right? Of a man patiently waiting and kneeling by the pass, waiting for the Lord's word to enter. I feel like there's been a desire in me in the past to like say, hey, let's go settle Zion. Let's go live together. We'll get a commune going. We'll kind of figure it out. And now I don't have that as much anymore. I still have that desire to be there, but the desire to wait for the Lord's word before I perform that action is a lot stronger. Anyway, that was just something that really struck me this time that has never struck me before. Just this idea that there was not anything done save it were by his word. So they're waiting for him to direct them for these big steps that they're doing. All right, moving to 22. So this is, again, we're still talking about the ship. And where does he say it? God, and I said unto them, if God had commanded me to do all things, I could do them. This is kind of going at the same pattern, right? If he should command me that I should say unto this water, be thou earth, it should be earth. And if I should say it, it would be done. There's this great confidence that Nephi has that if the Lord says it, it will be done. And again, this reminded me of this Genesis 14, that you can do kind of anything by faith. Break mountains, divide the seas, dry up waters, turn them out of their course. To do all things according to his will, according to his command. And by this, the will of the Son and God, which was performed before the foundation of the world. Yeah, someone have a thought?
Yeah, I had one thought. When I was reading this week, in a parallel study, I was actually reading Nephi, son of Helaman, and this caught my eye like it never had before, that perhaps this isn't faith, this confidence that Nephi has, perhaps it is his priesthood. That truly he could command the water if he was supposed to do that, and it would be dry land. That has given him confidence, but he has something that is given to him that is greater than an average Joe would have.
Right. Yeah. And I think you are, again, going back to that Genesis 14, you are approved by faith first, right? That's how you're approved by God, is by having great faith. But then it does seem like there's this confidence that they have that's due to the relationship that they have with God. And so this is maybe getting back to at least for me, it gets back to my original question that Marie helped us walk through. I feel like the stronger your relationship is with God, the more able you are to walk uprightly before him, or as we see here, to stand in the presence of God. I feel like that has got to be one of the greatest blessings that there is, to be called a son and to be told to stand and to talk. Anyway, I'm sure all of our hopes is that we could one day get to the point where we could stand in the presence of God. I don't think I could now, but I have hope that is something that's possible. Let's see, we've got 10 minutes. Okay, I've got a couple more things I wanted to share. That was probably the biggest thought that I have, this idea of this confidence that he had before God, and that it was because of the relationship that he developed with God over time. But in 23, I don't know, it says shake, and I thought in the LDS version it says to shock. But I liked shake a lot better. In this is paragraph 23. The Lord says that he will show forth his power into them and he will shake them. And if you look at shake, if you look up shake in the Book of Mormon, man, there are some really cool little stories, little cool things that pop up. Jacob says his faith could not be shaken. And so we see shake is this kind of theme, this thematic word theme that runs through the Book of Mormon. And there's a lot of like really cool ones like that. Shake or stand. Stand as a witness, especially, that comes up a lot. So I encourage you to kind of look up that if you get bored. It's kind of fun. Verse 24, it came to pass, again, we see that the timbers of curious workmanship. So again, there's something kind of like highlights, like, hey, look, this is something interesting you should be thinking about. And then he doesn't just leave it there, right? He says that the Lord has shown me what, after what manner I should work the timbers. I did not work the timbers after the manner which was learned by men. Neither did I build a ship after the manner of men. I did build it after the manner of the Lord, the manner which the Lord has shown to me. Wherefore, it was not after the manner of men. He's kind of like belaboring this point that this vessel that would carry them to the promised land could not be done after the manner of men. It could not be done by the learning of men. Only after the pattern of the Lord. And so, again, in me thinking about our own journey from organized religion to some hopefully someday to reach a land of promise, we can't do it after the manner of the learning of men. So, my business training, my economic training, everything that I've been learning in school and through hands-on experience, those things can't get me there. The Lord might be able to use those. Right? I mean, the Lord used the fact that Nephi knew how to build a bellows and to make tools, and he was able to use that for this cool purpose. So maybe the Lord can use our talents, but it really is not after the manner of men, which was powerful to me. That it was not after the manner of men, and it won't be for us. It will be something that's surprising. Verse 24: I Nephi did go into the mount oft, and I did pray oft unto the Lord. Wherefore the Lord showed unto me great things. That just seems so simple to me. It seems so simple for Nephi. The pattern is so clear. He went to the mount and he prayed often. Therefore the Lord showed him great things. It seems like that's it. It's like, hey guys, go to the mount and pray often, and I will show you great things. Or the Lord will show you great things. It just seemed like that was a powerful thing. So clear to him and not so clear to me, because the Lord has not showed unto me many great things. I feel like I have witnessed a few great things, but not much. Maybe just things. Again, we have this weird dichotomy in 27 where the voice of the Lord came unto my father that we should arise and go down to the ship. So he's commanded to build it, but then his father is told, hey, go down into the ship. Almost like two witnesses, right? One is told to build, and the other one is told the time is now ready. Let's see. All right, so here's another question I have. The brethren and some of the other people are, they start partying or something on the ship. And it says that they were lifted up unto exceeding rudeness. Any thoughts on what that was? Like what were they doing, and could we be doing the same thing somehow? I mean, is rudeness, is that maybe us, how we maybe talk about or talk to our old bishop or our family who are still LDS? Like, are we lifted up to rudeness against them as we journey from where we are to where we think we're going? I don't know. Anyone have any thoughts on that? I've never had a really clear either parallel for what that means for us or what that really meant that they were doing. I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts on that. If not, then maybe that's something I should go into the mount and ask the Lord for. All right, so verse 30, again, he's bound. They bound him in so much that he could not move. Right, last time they bound him, he burst the bands, suggesting that he had this priesthood. This time he did not. This time he didn't do it, right? He was not supposed to. But they're driven back upon the waters for the space of 3 days, which again is kind of a Jonah motif. They're about to be swallowed up in the depths of the sea. Very reminiscent of Jonah and being swallowed up by the fish. But what's interesting is after having been driven back upon the waters for the space of 4 days, my brethren began to see the judgments of God were upon them, and they must perish. So you have 3 and then 4. And again, for the Hebrew mind, 3 and 4 are very, very powerful numbers. And so to have both of them kind of show up at the same time, they didn't have to. He could have just said it took 4 days. But he made the point to do the 3 and then to do the 4. And I think only an Israelite would have done that. I don't think we would have done that. But for him, that was kind of important. And so I definitely saw a Hebraism there. And there's a couple others like that. For instance, in 31, we hear about Lehi and what this did to Lehi. Let's see. All right, it's 31 in mine. I think it's the same here. I guess it's 30 here. All right. My parents being stricken in years and having suffered much grief because their children were brought down, even upon their sick beds, because of their grief and much sorrow and the iniquity of my brethren, they were brought near even to be carried out of this time to meet their God. Yea, their gray hairs were about to be brought down to lie low in the dust. Yea, even they were near to be cast with sorrow into a watery grave. If you read the story of Jacob, where Joseph is supposedly lost to the wild beasts, Jacob's stories it's almost exactly the same. It talks about how his gray hairs were brought low to the dust, and he was about to be, buried with sorrow in something grave. It doesn't use watery, but he's trying to kind of tie Lehi's grief to Jacob's because everyone would know how great that grief was. Let's see. So we know that Jacob and Joseph were born, and he brings them up here somewhere. Let's see if we can find it. And that struck me this time as well. Yeah, here they are, right there. So Jacob and Joseph, also being young, having need of much nourishment, were grieved because of the afflictions of their mother. So this gets back to Bryce's point of Lehi becoming a patriarch, in that he lost 2 sons, right? In his vision, he saw that his 2 sons were leaving him, right? They were divided. Nephi and Sam on the one hand, Laman and Lemuel on the other hand. And so it's really significant to me that he would have 2 sons born in the wilderness. These 2 righteous sons. It's like a covenant replacement. Job had children that were born to replace the ones he lost, and you see that kind of fairly often. And so the fact that he had 2 covenant sons born in replacement, just like Seth was born to replace Abel, suggests to me that Lehi followed this pattern of patriarchs. And so somehow that shifted over to Lehi and to Nephi at the same time. Anyway, that's about all I've got. The Nephi has some really openly honest things to say about his writings here. That he made a record, and that he said, nevertheless, I do not write anything upon plate, save it be I think it be sacred. And now if I do err, even they did err of old. Right? He's trying to say, I'm just following what other ones have done. I don't know exactly what I'm doing. I think this is sacred. I think it's sacred because it matches what everyone else has written. Not that I would excuse myself because of other men, but because of the weakness which is in me, according to the flesh, I would excuse myself. For the things which some esteem to be of great worth, both to body and soul, others set at naught and trample under their feet. Yea, even the very God of Israel do men trample under their feet. I can picture him scratching this into the metal somehow, and I'm sure it took a long time and effort. And I can see him, this is the end of his life when he's thinking back on things, writing that and saying, well, I don't really mean they trample God under their feet. I say trample under their feet, but I would speak in other words. They set him at naught and hearken not to the voice of his counsels. I think if were he writing that with pen, he could have, scratched it out and then rewritten it. But to me, that's one of those little funky things, and you see that several times in the Book of Mormon, where they write something and they say, I want to re-say that. And, the metal is precious, so they can't just scratch it out. They have to keep going and fix it from the end. All right, well, we've got a lot of cool things coming up for us. We've got a few minutes if anyone else has something to say. Other than that, thank you for listening, and it's been a great little time. It's been great for me, so thank you.
Anyone have any other comments? Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jeff, for doing this, and we'll continue moving forward next week with the next set of chapters.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.